He sagt der Herr der Gemara. Omar Rav Dimi mina hardo. Hi man, the masbin lebeis olachak. Somebody sold a house to his friend. Apal God, the courts of late umka varuma. Even though he writes that I'm not only selling you the house itself, but umka, all the land below it to the core of the earth. Varuma, all the airspace above it, to Shemayim. Tzarech umichtav lei. You're still not going to be koina. You're still not going to be koina a bar in the property unless you use an additional extra verbiage of tzarech lemichtav lei keniloch. You should be koina this property mitahaim ara from the deepest depths biyad roim rakia. So this redundancy in language indicates that I'm giving more. I'm selling more than just a house. It's airspace. It's land underneath, but I'm also selling a bar. So, Gemara, my time, why isn't it the fact that I mentioned Umka Varuma? Why doesn't that extra lotion include a bar? The Umka Varuma bistama loikan. Because if I sell you a property without saying Umka Varuma, you're not kind of the ground rights below the property. You're not kind of the air rights above the property. So ahani umkavaruma lemikni umkavaruma. So I need to say those words umkavaruma so that it will also include rights of the ground below the property as well as the rights of the air above the property. That's what you need to write umkavaruma for. So we don't have any extra expression in the Lashon Hashtar to also include the buyer as well. Therefore, v'hani mitoim ara hadrei merkia lemikne bar v'dus u'mechilas. Simple. So a default sale includes only the property, not the air rights, not the land below the surface. If you say varuma, then you mean to include the land below the surface and the air rights above it. And if you say an even stronger language of Mitayim Arab at Merkia, then you're also including a bar dus and a mechila shenapram. So the main yesod that Rav Dimi is teaching us is that a default sale without any extra verbiage does not include air rights, does not include rights to the soil below the surface. Zokt Gemara lema Messiah. Let's see if we could bring a raya to Rav Dimi's understanding. And let's try our very own Mishnah. I don't think it's the Mishnah that we learned yet. It's the Mishnah that we're going to learn today. Lo yasabar v'lo yasadus. If you sell someone property, it does not include the bar and the dus in the property. Even if in the Nusach Hashtar you included the verbiage of umkavaruma, it still doesn't include bar v'dus, which seems to mirror exactly what Rav Dimi said. If you're going to tell me that by default, even without any extra verbiage, you're automatically kind of the air rights and the land rights below, then having spoken out umkavaruma is redundant. And therefore, lehani umkavaruma lemikli dar bar v'dus u'mechilas. Very simple raya. Seems very clear-cut and straightforward. The Gemara is going to be matchit with a difficult to appreciate teretz. Let's just quickly look at the Bach. The Bach says, loy shricha. No, it's actually speaking in the Brisa, in the Mishnah that we just quoted, the loy kasav loy. It's speaking where you didn't write umka varuma. Nevertheless, if you didn't write umka varuma, only there it does not include the bar. But if you wrote umka varuma, it will be extra and it does include the bar. Correct, Gemara, that's a very nice teretz, but that's not what the Mishnah says. It says very specifically in the Mishnah that even if you wrote umka varuma, it still doesn't include the bar, the dus and mechilos. So how could you tell me that the Mishnah means when you didn't write umka varuma? Zok Gemara hachikam. Av al pi Shaloi kosav loy, kemisha kosav dami. The default, without any extra verbiage, is that automatically the sale of property includes the air rights above it, as well as the soil rights below it. So, Avavi Shaloi kosav, kemisha kosav dami, lemikna umka varuma. It would automatically include umka varuma. But lemikna bar v'dosa mechilos, if you want to include in the sale bar v'dosa mechilos, there because of the umka baruma kali, the loikas of loikan. We're still chasring some mechilah ways. So again, this is a very big doichik in understanding the Mishnah, but the Gemara wants to deflect the raya to Rav Ami from the Mishnah. So once again, the Mishnah really means that by default, even if you don't write umka varuma, it's as if you wrote it, and therefore, by default, it includes the airspace and the land rights below. That's the default. And if you add the words umka varuma, that would even include a bar v'dos, which would not be consistent with Rav Dimi. So the Gemara deflected the first raya. The Gemara is going to try to bring another raya to Rav Dimi. Tashma. Our Mishnah that we already learned says that when you sell somebody a house, it does not include the roof. That is kept for the seller. If it has a maka that shows that it's an independent place, it's not just the roof of a house, but it's actually the floor of the patio on the roof. That's a separate place, and therefore it's not included in the sale. Frag the Gemara. Bistama kani umka veruma. If the default is when you sell a property, you do include the airspace above the property up to Shemayim, well, that would include the roof as well. So therefore, ki gavaya asar tvachim have it. So big deal, you have a mica around it. That's 10 tvachim. The roof is part of the airspace because when you bought a house, you bought everything up to the Shemayim. So therefore, you must have arrived from here that by default, you're not going to umka veruma. And therefore, by default, when you sell a house stomach, it does not include a roof. So it's a riot to Rav Dimi because that's exactly what Rav Dimi says. That if you don't say umka veruma, he says if you don't say umka veruma, you don't include the roof. You don't include the airspace. So that's a beautiful riot to Rav Dimi. Again, Zaktor, it's not a riot. Because even if umka veruma would include the airspace up to Shemayim, it would still exclude the roof. Why? Even the gavaya asar tvachim, if the roof has a border around it, the 10 tvachim high, that really makes it into a strong, independent living space. Choshev makes it a choshev. So listen to this. So even though you're kind of adrum shemaya, there's a gap in your ownership because you own the house, you own the airspace of adrum shemaya, but that level of the roof, you don't know. It's a very big chiddush to say that, but that is what the Gemara says. So once again, you don't have a raya to Rav Dimi. Now the Gemara suggests maybe to ask a kasha on Rav Dimi. Toshma. Let's see if we could bring a raya to ask a kasha on Rav Dimi. So Amar Shlokish, Zois Omeres, we just had this yesterday. Zois Omeres, from the fact that the Brisa tells us that if you sell a property, if a Levi sells a property, and the Levi says, I want to receive the Meiser Rishon from this property, it works. And how does it work? Because even though the Lashon that he used was Almanas, that he should be able to get the Meiser Rishon, that is translated into a shear, into the fact that the seller is retaining the schus in the property to get the Meiser Rishon. And yesterday we discussed how that works. Actually, we discussed that we don't know how that works. We just touched on it. And we offered up an opportunity for anybody who wants to become a Rosh Yeshiva to get pshat in this Gemara, and then he'll have a whole niche to open up his own yeshiva. Because most yeshivas don't learn the fourth parak because they didn't figure out pshat in that Gemara yet. If a yeshiva had shiurim for a week on that, on Hamoichas Habayis, then he could advertise, our yeshiva is unique. We even learn Hamoichas Habayis. But anyway, from the fact that we're saying your extra lashon of Tnai is retranslated into a shiur, that it means you're withholding part of the property, the part of the property that generates the Ma'aser Rishon. From that, we say, that teaches us another shear would work as well. The top row of bricks should be mine, which basically is the roof, floor of the roof. The halacha is the yuta ha'alyoyna shalom. He gets to keep the top row of bricks. And the reason why the Gemara asked my Hilchasa was more, because the Mishnah already says, why do I need Rish Lakish's great Zoyse Meres if I have a Meforish Mishnah that says that if I sell a house, the roof belongs to me. The roof is not sold. So what extra finish over here are we building out of the fact that he said Amanashad Yuta Al Yoda Shali? Because even if he didn't say anything, even if he still sold a house, the roof doesn't get sold if it has a mica around it at 10 tefachim. Obviously, if he says a Yuta Al Shali, there's something else that he's trying to retain for himself. And what did Rav Zid tell us? Rav Zid Omar, I'm retaining rights, air rights to your property that I now could make a porch off that roof that'll extend over your land that I'm selling you. I'm retaining the right to do that. That was one pshat. That is not the pshat that we're discussing in our sugya to ask a kasha from Abdimi. But there was another pshat in what the seller means when he says almanas to the yuta al yodishim. And what was that pshat? Rav Papa said a pshat. That was right at the top of Samach Kilul Amud Beis. We just learned it. Rav Papa said, if you want to build a second floor, you have a right to build. But the problem is, doesn't that right automatically belong to me? If you're going to hold, like Rav Dimi says, that when I sell a property, even if I don't make any tanoim about anything, it doesn't include the airspace. So if it doesn't include the airspace, well, then obviously, me, the vendor, me, the seller, should have a right to build a second level above it, because that was never included in the sale. Why do you have to speak out an extra nusach of Almanash Shali without speaking that out? By default, when you sell a property, you retain the air rights. So of course you're retaining the right to build a second floor. So what is the chiddush of Almanas Yuta Al Yoina Shali? Lamali Almanas. So you have a raya, in fact, that the airspace is sold, which is not like Rav. And for the Gemara, you don't have a raya. When we learned it yesterday, I spoke out that Rav Papa is not what it seems. It doesn't mean it doesn't literally mean that you could build a second floor. What it means is that if the roof caves in, you're allowed to rebuild it. That's what it was. And and so in Echanami, it wouldn't include the air rights. Of course, you can't build a second floor. Rather, the extra Tanai, Al-Manash, is saying that you could rebuild it if it breaks. And that's something that by default you don't say was retained by the vendor. So at the end of the day, Rav Dimi says that if you sell something, you sell a property without any Tanai whatsoever, it does not include the Shemayim, it does not include the Aretz Mitachas. It does not include it. If you speak out Ruma V'Umka, it will include those because you specified it. And if you want to also include buyers, you have to use a very redundant lashon of Mitay Myra Vadroim Rukina. So I don't want to go through all of the different Rishonim because it could take us forever, but I just want to point out some of the difficulties that Tosfos raises in the sugya that leads him to have a different shot. So one of the difficulties is, let's read the words of Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, "Shemratza livnois aliyah al gaba boy." We're now, the way Rashi is learning, the way the Rashbam is learning, we're fetching it to mean, it doesn't mean building a second story. It means if the roof collapsed, you could rebuild it. But the lashon of Rav Papa doesn't sound like it. The lashon of Rav Papa sounds like it's talking about building a second floor. So Tosfos learns a little bit differently. Tosfos learns that Taka means building a second floor. And he talks about You're not allowed to put extra weight on the building. So building a second floor that'll be supported by a perimeter beam. Tosfos gets into a pretty elaborate shot in the sugya. But there's a lot of Torah on the sugya. The mission that we've been talking about for such a long time, now we're going to learn the actual mission inside. It does not include a sale of a property, does not include a bar and a dos. Even though in the contract you wrote black and white that was the way it would be a right to Dimi, or the way the Gemara deflected the right to Dimi a moment ago. It doesn't literally mean even though you wrote it. Even though by default it's included. That was the dichlei that the Gemara said, so we shouldn't have a raya to Rav Dimi from the Mishnah. Now, this is another very famous machlokes. I sold a property to somebody else. Or Reuben sold a property to Shimon. But Reuben retained the bar. What about access to the bar? If the bar is in the middle of his property and he sold all the property around it, how in the world is Reuben going to get to his bar? He doesn't own the property around the bar. So Zok Rabbi Yehuda, B'tzarach likach loy derech divrei Rabbi Akiva. This moicher, he sold everything besides the bar. If he wants access to the bar, he's going to have to buy that back from the lekech of the lekech. The Chachamim say, Einoi tzarach likach loy derech. Of course, if I sell something and I'm retaining the bar, of course, I'm also retaining for myself an easement to be able to get to my bar. We're going to see the Gemara is going to discuss exactly what is the reasoning for this machlokes. Umayde Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is Maida. Did I say Rabbi Yehuda before? Or did I say Rabbi Akiva? Umayde Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is Maida. Bizman she'amar loy chutz me'elu. We mentioned that if you sell it, it doesn't include a bar v'dos. But what if you speak out an extra word, chutz me'elu, except for the bar v'dos? You didn't have to say it, because by default, the bar v'dos remains with you. So if you speak out chutz me'elu, then you're clearly showing that you want something else. That means that you're retaining for yourself the easement to get to your bar, and therefore, she'ein tzarich likach derech. Now, what if it was the other way around? You kept the property for yourself, but you only sold the bar v'dos. Does the buyer automatically get access to it, or does he also have to now buy access to it? So he doesn't have to buy. So it seems like Rabbi Akiva is always siding with the purchaser, because when I sold you the property and I wanted to keep the bar v'dos, the lekech could make me buy access. But when I sell the bar v'dos to the lekech, access is included. So it looks like Rabbi Akiva is into customer service. No, the lekech would have to buy it back. So the Chachamim doesn't side with the lekech. Right here, the lekech has to buy. And when you sold the property, we say that you automatically are retaining for yourself easements. So it seems like Rabbi Akiva is sort of siding with the customer, and the Chachamim are siding with the vendor. But the Gemara is going to analyze this machlokes very deeply today. Yosy Ravina Vika Kashala. Before we get into machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, let's analyze something else first. Ravina had a problem. Hainu bar, hainu dos. A bar and a dos mean the same thing. Why is the lashon lo yas a bar v'lo yas a dos? They're pretty much one and the same. Amalei Rav Tesva Ravina. So Rav Tesva told Ravina, Tashma, let's see if we can help you understand this. The Tanya, Echad Abar, the Echad Adus, Bekarka. They're both inland. El Shabar Bechafira. The Abar, a hole is created by digging down below the surface of the earth. The Adus Bebinyan. And the way a dus is built is the floor might be the ground, but you build up walls around it, so it would be considered an above ground pool. So that's the difference. Yosef Rab Ashi Vikakashale. He had the same kasha. Hainu bar hainu dos. Amalei Makashisha Rav Chistel Rab Ashi Toshma. Tanya Echad Abar Bechad Adus Bekarka. El Shabar Bechavira Bados Bebinyan. So now that we know the physical difference between these two items, we still need to understand why did the Mishnah need to tell us both? If it told us bar, would we not have known dus? If it told us halacha legabe dus, would we not have known that the halacha applies to legabe bar? So the Rishbam says no. Each one has its own unique characteristics. That if the Mishnah only told us that you didn't include the bar, I might think that you didn't include the dus, or vice versa. If the Mishnah says it didn't include the dus, I might have thought that the bar is included. And the Rishbam says as follows.
They're both on the ground.
They're both on the ground, but the dus is above the ground. The dus is walls built up above the ground. Because the Lashon is El Shabar B'Chafir B'Dus B'Binyan. It's built up. So let's see the Rashbam. B'Chafira, B'Karka Kasha. You dig into hard earth so it doesn't cave in. Shemachzik Mayim B'Lo Binyan. You could dig down and the earth around the hole is strong enough that it doesn't need any reinforcement and it will be able to contain water. The binyan is chayfrin bar tikuach. Oh, so you're right. You're digging. You're right. So I apologize. Not above ground. You're digging a hole in soft sand that will easily collapse, and therefore uvoinin loy kaisel. And you line the wall of the bar, like Mati is correcting me. You line the wall of the bar with stones to reinforce it so the sand shouldn't cave in. But they're both below ground. So I stand corrected. They're both below ground, is how Mati is explaining it. And that is mikri dos. The hilchach. Now we have our shrichas. Itana bar. If the Tana only told us that a bar wasn't included in the sale of a property, havmin hani bar shubechafira, because it's dug out. Aval dush shehu bebinyan ke'en habayis harayu b'chal bayis. A dush is a built up thing. Maybe a built up thing is similar to a house which is built up, and maybe that would be the Tana dus. And if it only told us that a dus wasn't included, it's a separate structure. It's a choshev structure, so it shouldn't necessarily be lumped in to the sale of the house. Aval bar, that's not so choshev, it's just a hole in the ground. And maybe the lift of gabibayis, maybe the bottle of the house, tricha, that's what the Mishnah had to tell us that both these items, both the bar, both dus, are not included in the sale of a house. Okay, now let's get into the meat and potatoes. Zog to Hela the Gemara. The tzarech likach leiderech divrei Rabbi Akiva lechachamim ein tzarech. So let's look at the Gimel to get a good start with the Bach. The tzarech hamoicher likach derech. Okay, just takes it over there. My love. Oh no, I'm looking at the Bay. I'm looking at the Gimel. Bays. The my commitment. What is the maflot? Turning on to Amud Beis. So now we're going to ask, what is the reasoning for the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Pchal? So let's start by saying the Rabbi Akiva savar moicher be'ein yafam. Rabbi Akiva says that whenever a moicher sells, he's selling a very complete package. So if he's selling the property, I'm not withholding for myself not one bit of the property. Yes, the bar, yes, the duos is withheld, but that's not withholding. That's not part of the property. But the property that I'm selling you every square inch of that property. Therefore, I would have to find a way to get back to my bar. For abundance Savri, no. Moicher bein ra moicher. When someone sells, he's not looking to give a drop more than he needs to. So the machlokes is normally when someone sells something, does he sell it? Does he sell a premium package? Does he sell the max? Or does he sell the min? That's the machlokes, which would mean it would be relevant in many other shilas that there's a question as to what the intention of the moicher is when he's selling it. For instance, the halacha was there's a shaila of someone who sells trees, but he doesn't specifically say that he's selling the property amongst the trees. So if you would hold moicher be'ein yafa moicher like Rabbi Akiva, it means he would be included the property around the trees. But if you hold like the Rabbanan, he wouldn't be. And that's what the Rishbam says bringing from Cheskes Abatim, which we learned already. Mochri Ilonis V'Shayir Karka Lefanav. He sold the Ilonis, but he kept the Karka. Looked at Rabbi Kiva Rabbanan. The Rabbi Kiva Yesh Le Karka Lebala Ilon. According to Rabbi Kiva, when I sold the Elon, I'm also including the Karka, meaning Shim Yomis HaElon Yita Achabim Plain. When I'm selling you the tree, I'm selling you property rights, so that if your Elon should die, you have a right to plant another one. I'm just selling you the minimum rights of your tree, but once it dies, you cannot replant. So if the machloikis of Rabbi Kiva the Rabbana, if we conclude that pshat in the machloikis is generally or the moicher bein yava moicher or moicher bein ra moicher, then it would perfectly explain their machloikis in the case of mocher ilons. That's what the Gemara starts off. Zok the Gemara, how do you have such a right? Udeka amri nami ba'alma Rabbi Kiva l'tamei. The amar moicher bein yafa moicher mehacha. That we had the machloikis by Ilanais, where Rabbi Kiva holds that the buyer of the tree can replant it if it dies, which is bein yafa, and the Chacham hold that if the tree dies, the buyer of the tree cannot replant it, which is bein ra. That's the same machloikis as here, and the source of it would be our Mishnah. The source of it will be our Mishnah, and therefore we can apply this machloikis of moicher bein yafa, the moicher bein ra, to other machloikis that we have. Zok the Gemara, but you can't, because our Mishnah might not be about moicher bein yafa and moicher bein ra. It might be about special mitigating factors that wouldn't apply to the general rule of moicher bein yafa or bein ra. Rather than there might be specific reasons why this case is different. Dilma, maybe. Bahapli, I'm just looking into the Bach. Bahapli, that Rabbi Kiva Savar, there's a special reason over here. It's not because of Ein Yofa. It's because here there's a specific problem where the Loikeach would reject the deal if it didn't come with this condition. Because Ein Adam Reitza, Shayitin Me'aisav, V'yidrasu Acherem. I'm paying you $100,000 for a property, and now people are trampling through it? No way. So even if you hold moicher be'in ra moicher, in this case, it would include the whole property, and it wouldn't give an easement to the seller to come and access his bar, because there's a separate svara that I know that if I don't include it, you as a lakeich won't want to buy this deal from me at all, because you don't want to spend big money for a property, and it comes with an easement where people can trample through. So therefore, maybe in general, Rabbi Kiva doesn't hold moicher bein yafa moicher. Maybe when you sell a tree, you're just selling the tree and not a right to replant it. But here, there's a special situation where the lakeich wouldn't want to purchase a property that's going to come with the rights of others to trample through. And maybe when the Rabbanan in our sugya said that you do retain those rights to walk, maybe that's not because moicher bein ra, maybe regularly moicher bein yafa. And when you sell a tree, you have to include the land below it, and therefore he could replant it if it dies. But I think there's a different reason, and that is ein adam reitza sheyital mois v'yivach ba'aber. Nobody's going to be willing, because of receiving some funds, to now have to hire a helicopter every time he wants to access his bar. So there's a special time over here on Rabbi Kiva's side. There's a special time here on the Rabbanan side. So you don't really see from them a machlokes of moicher bein yafa or moicher bein ra, because this is a very special circumstance. So that can't be, the ratio of our Mishnah cannot be the source of the famous machlokes of Rabbi Kiva and the Rabbanan if moicher is bein yafa or moicher is bein ra. So, let's look at the seifa of our Mishnah that we also just learned. Machran la'acher. What if you didn't sell the property and retained the bar? You sold the bar and retained the property. Rabbi Kiva Omer Eini Tzarech Likach L'derech, L'chachamim Omer Tzarech. There's a lot of words missing based on the Bach. Tzarech Likach Loi Derech, he has to buy a derech. My love, I'm reading from the Bach. Let's say that this is the machlokes. It can't be the same as before because we already have the ratio. The Seifa must be telling us an additional chiddush that we would not have seen from the ratio. So my love, the Rabbi Kiva over moicher ben yafa moicher. Rabbi Kiva has the general rule of moicher ben yafa, and that's why when you sell just a bar, you include access to it. Rabbanan Savri moicher ben ra moicher, and therefore, when you sell the bar, you don't sell access to it. Zok to Gemara, no, you don't have to chiraya, because maybe there's special mitigating circumstances in the second case as well. And I'm reading from the back. Vidilma b'hapliki. Maybe this is what they're arguing about. And now we can transfer back into the Gemara itself. To Rabbi Kiva Savar, Basra Daita, Rabbi Kiva holds that when you look at a transaction, you look at the chaos concerns. Rabban Savri, Basra Daita, the Moichers. You look at the Moicher's concerns. But it's not about whether or not the Moicher is Be'en Yafa or Be'en Ra. It's about whose concerns you look at. So I can see Mati is looking at me. Isn't that one and the same? Right? Very good point. So the Rashbam gets granular and explains what the difference is. The Dilma, B'ha Pli, Rabbi Kiva Savar Basadatit Lakechet. Klaimar, Bein Rabbanan, Bein Rabbi Kiva, Chashivi Lahu. Look at the Rabach. Chashivi Lahu, Hanach Shtei Tainas. They both agree that there's two separate mitigating concerns. Derisa, the concern of the buyer not wanting to buy a field that someone has a right to traipse through. And they also understand the concern of somebody that not wanting to fly into his bar, rather someone will want access to it. These are things that forget Moicher Ein Ra and Yafa. People are makbid on these things. Ella, Rabbi Kiva miyapa koyach lekeach v'chol makam sheyesh leitaina kineged hamoicher. When the lekeach has a specific taina, there Rabbi Kiva accepts and prioritizes is the taina of the lekeach. But also Basar Daita lekeach, and he follows the taina, the special taina of the lekeach, mishum de l'shadi inish zuzi b'chti, because people don't want to spend money for nothing. So in the ratio, I don't want to spend money when someone's going to traipse through my property. In the safe, I don't want to spend money if I can't get access to a bar. The moicher knew that Lekech wants to buy a bar with access or a property with nobody else having access. The Lekech wants to buy a quality property. No one's spending money unless they're getting premium product. Hilchach, in this specific case, Yad Lekech al Halyoina, and therefore, but it's not a general me wanting to give more. When there's a specific taina, when there's a specific problem that's reducing the value of what Lekech's buying, there and only there does Rabbi Kiva aside with Lekech. But in the case of the tree, there's no specific taina. The question is, did I sell you land rights or not? The tree that I sold you is 100% yours. There's no taina there. You want to know if I'm so generous, I'm also giving land rights, that would be a different machlokes. That's not illustrated here in this mission. Rabbanan Nozzle, let's look at the hay. Rabbanan follows Azli, he changed the plural. Rabbanan Azli, Basar Das the Moicher. Why? The Yad Belashar Latachayna. We always know that if you have a star, you're only entitled to what your star unequivocally proves. Therefore, we say that the Yad Moicher is allowed. Aval Gabi Mocher Lanois, Vishayar Karka, you can't bring a raya from our Mishnah to that case. The Leka Loila Moicher, Veloila Lekayach, Tainas Drisa, Uprichazaver. There's no special tiny there. It's just a general shaila. When you sell, are you being overly generous or not? Maybe both Rabbanan and Rebbe Kiva can hold over there Moicher ben Ra or ben Yafa, and their sheet over here would not impact that. So therefore, the Gemara needs to find another source for this rule all over Shas, where we say Rebbe Kiva says Moicher ben Yafa. Where did he say this? Zok the Gemara, the Elameha. Let's try the next brisa, the next mission. I believe Meha, if you look at the base, is just in a couple of blocks away. It says, Lo yasabar, v'lo yasagas, v'lo yasashoy. This is talking about not, this is about somebody who sells a house. It doesn't include a bar, it doesn't include a gas, and it doesn't include a shoivach. A bar, we know what it is. A gas is a press. A shoivach is a place that contains birds. Bein chareven, say if they're out of service. Bein yeshuvin, say if they're still in service. And since it doesn't include those, which means the vendor retains them for himself, the vendor needs access to them. Once again, Rabbi Akiva has the same shita that when you retain the items in the property for yourself, you're not retaining an access to get to it. So you'd have to buy that separately back from the lekeach. But that's the Rabbi Akiva. So frag the Gemara hasul lamali. Why did the Mishnah find a need to share with us this machlokes? We pretty much covered all the bases from both sides of the equation. Say if I sell the property and I'm retaining the bar. Say if I sell the bar and retain the property, we have the taina of Einan and Perech Baver. We have a taina that someone doesn't want to give money and have them trample. All the tainas were already flushed out and clarified in our Mishnah. Why does the Tana on Ayin Aleph have to talk about this all over again? We know all the information. So since that case is totally redundant, Elalav, Helkamash Malon, to Rabbi Akiva Savar Moicher Ben Yofa Moicher, for Rabbanan Savar Moicher Ben Ra Moicher. Why? Because we're repeating a machlokes that we already have all the information on, that we don't need any more clarification of. And it repeats it again. It must be because the Tana is trying to display that this is more than just a local machlokes. This is a general machlokes of Moicher Ben Yofa, Moicher Ben Ra, which we can successfully apply to the case of Moicher Eselam. Frag the Gemara, no. We needed the Tana to address that case as well. The Dil Mashmin and Bayis, the Kamash V'lon Sada. We needed to have a Mishnah that talks about a Moicher Esasada. What does it say in our case, which says loy as a bar, I believe it's talking about moicher as a soda. But the next Mishnah maybe is referring to moicher as a bias. Maybe it makes a difference what the base sale was. If the base sale was a bias or if the base sale was a soda. Why would there be a difference whether or not the bar is included if you're selling a bias versus a soda? Utricha, yashmin and bias. If we only told you the case of bias, over there, the lokeach objects to the moicher traipsing through his property is mishum de boy tzniusa. In my chutzner, where I'm living, I don't want strangers traipsing through it. I use it for private functions, for private things. That's where your access would stare me. So maybe only over there will the lokeach object to this. And maybe only there does Rabbi Akiva say it's all included. Aval Sada, but in the Sada, what does he care if someone walks through his property? Big deal. Maybe there's no special taina. And if there's no special taina, then Rabbi Akiva would agree that access wouldn't be included. That access would be included because there's no special taina lekech to stop the access. So that's why Rabbi Akiva had to express his shita even by a Sada. The Yashmin Sada. But if we only knew the machlokes by Sada, I would have said we should dekasha ledavsha. You know why Blakeach doesn't want anybody else to have access? Because if someone's stomping through my field, it's going to mess up my field. Aval bayis, you walking through my house doesn't mess anything up. I'll make you take off your shoes. Emaloi. There, maybe the Blakeach wouldn't object. So there's two separate reasons why the Mishnah needs to tell us the same machlokes about these special akpodos. That's not a general shaila of Moicher Ben Yofa. Of Moicher Ben Ra, we still need to share this halacha, sai in the case of selling a bias and a chotzer, and sai in the case of selling us. So we don't have a makar. We're still searching for a makar that Rabbi Akiva in general holds Moicher Ben Yofa, and the Rabbon hold in general Moicher Ben Yofa. Elami Seifa, we finally found our answer. The Seifa of that brisa on Ein Aleph, or that Mishnah on Ein Aleph that we just brought. Machrin la'akar. The flip side of selling the property, you're only selling the bar, the dus, the gas, or whatever it was that you're selling. Because I include with the lekeach access. This case is completely redundant because you're going to say maybe to tell you that Rabbi Kiva follows the das hamoicher, the das lekeach, and the Chum say you're worried about the das hamoicher. We already know that from our Mishnah here. All we needed, that next Mishnah, was to tell us that these same rules apply to selling a bias. But as far as the fact that it goes both ways, because Rabbi Kiva holds you side with the lekeach, and the Rabbanan say you side with the moicher, that principle we know already. So why did I need the seifa of the second Mishnah? It's literally the same as our Mishnah over here. Since that case is completely redundant, why did the Tana offer up a completely redundant case to tell us that this machlokes Rabbi Kiva and the Rabbanan is way more than just a local issue? Rather, it's talking about a universal issue. Rabbi Kiva savar moicher ben yofa moicher, Rabbanan savri moicher ben ra moicher. Shema mina. Proof positive. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. Itmar. Amarav Itmar. Rav Huna Amarav said halacha kedivrei chacham. He passes like the chachamim that moicher is be'ein ra moicher. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Kiva that moicher is be'ein yafa. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Rav Huna. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba told Rav Huna, how could you tell me that you're saying in the name of Rav that we pass like the chachamim that moicher be'ein ra? Many times I myself said over in front of Rav, I pass like Rabbi Kiva. If, as you claim, Rav says that Allah like Rabbanon, why would he just be silent when I brought up that Allah is Rabbi Kiva? Amar lei. So Rav Huna said, Heichi Tanisa. How exactly did you quote the machlokes? Amar le'ibcha. The machlokes was quoted the opposite. That Rabbi Kiva said bein ra, and the Chachamim said bein yafa. Ibcha Tanina. So he said, Mishamachi lo yamalach lamidi. Yes, when you passed him like Rabbi Kiva, he thought you were referring to the Rabbi Kiva that was bein ra, not the Rabbi Kiva bein yafa. So therefore, it's no riot when you told Rav that Allah is Rabbi Kiva and he agreed. It's because Rav thought that you were saying that Rabbi Kiva says be'ein ra. So the Rashbam just tells us the maskana, which we're going to see tomorrow. Rabbi Kiva, the top Rashbam, the be'en yafa moicher. The hachi have a maskana Rabbi Kiva. We're going to see that this is the maskana that we pass on like Rabbi Kiva, that moicher be'en yafa. The amalei Rav Huna Rav Nachman, Rav Huna himself over here, who said Rav holds bein ra, he himself told Rav Nachman later, I actually agree with you, Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman was pastoring like Rabbi Kiva, who holds moicher bein yafa moicher. And why does Rav Nachman's psak have more credit than Rav Huna's opinion? The Makravisu, the Bava, the Reish Galusa, the Shchichidayim. You hang around in the courts because you're close to the Reish Galusa, and therefore you see over and over again that the Bezdin paskins that moicher bein yafa moicher, and that's how we would paskin. Okay, let's stop here and let us move on to tomorrow. It's geschmack that when I come on time, I finish them.